Today, I'm going to walk through the process for setting up a custom Claude Code ambient agent. Now, we're going to write this agent entirely using source code and drive the scheduling through GitHub Actions. So there's a few benefits to doing it this way. First of all, since we're building this all from source code, we can just leverage our existing Claude Code subscription, ideally the max plan, to run this as much as we want. We're not bound to any specific external services. We get to write the source code ourselves, so we have full control over what this agent is allowed to do and how it's set up. And really, this is just something that I think is going to become more common, just given how easy it is and how many platforms exist for building similar workflows, no code, but it's so easy to program with tools like Claude Code now that you can really just stand it up yourself using your existing subscriptions and free GitHub credits. To start, I've just gone ahead and created a dedicated repo for this project. So I called it Claude Code changelog. This is where we're going to just be putting all of our code as we move along. But yeah, so in terms of the actual agent we're building today, this is going to be an automatic changelog generating agent. So what it's going to do is run in a specific GitHub repo, probably nightly. It's going to look through the previous commits since the last time the workflow ran, and it's going to basically distill those down into the important user-facing or consumer-facing changes so that we can update a changelog and just keep folks up to speed on what's happening in the repo. Now, the reason we're not just building a simple non-AI workflow for this is that if you've worked in a Git repository, you know that there are a lot of changes that have nothing to concern users about. So this is things like documentation updates, specifically internal documentation, or build updates, or just little like internal changes that have no ramifications for the end user. So this agent is going to be very specifically focused on feature updates. It's going to be focused on bug fixes, things that our end users actually care about. What we're going to be doing is, again, driving this through the GitHub repository. This is going to be a bun-based project that is just an alternative to NPM Node. It's supposed to be an all-in-one kind of TypeScript framework. That will be the driving engine for our agent. We're going to be using Cursor as our IDE along with Claude Code in Cursor to actually help us implement some of the changes as we go. And we're going to be using kind of a variety of different tools to make this possible. So first of all, we're going to be using the Claude Code SDK, which allows us to just be very specific in our configuration of Claude Code. This lets us configure specific MCP servers, deliver a specific system prompt. We can automatically allow certain tools that Claude Code is going to use. This really gives us that fine-grained control that we're looking for inside of an agent, rather than just, your Claude Code experience on and just your normal project is going to have way more access than an agent like this will need. So this really gives us that fine-tooth comb to go through all of the settings and make sure that we're only allowing the agent to do what we want it to do. We're also going to be using the GitHub MCP server to actually drive all of the changes in GitHub. So if you can imagine, there's going to be a few different pieces to this. First of all, we actually need to be able to discover the specific commits that are relevant. We need to be able to discover the existing changelog file if one exists, so that Claude can both compare the commits that we're looking at to the changelog and update accordingly. And then also just to be able to persist the changelog updates somewhere. So we're going to need to be able to generate commits, update files, and ultimately we're going to drive this all through pull requests. So that means Claude Code is not going to be committing directly to our main branch. It's going to open a pull request, which we can then review to confirm that it's making the changes we want. And then lastly, because we're going to be using this in multiple repos, we're going to need different configuration options. So this is going to be built as a command line tool where we can feed in specific configuration parameters. Especially since we're going to be using this potentially across many repos, we need to be able to pass in parameters appropriately. Cool. So I'm going to jump over to my command line here. I've already cloned my repo locally. So to start, I'm just going to initialize a new bun project. We could just call this a blank project since it's going to be a CLI. And we're going to go ahead and install a few of those dependencies off the bat here. So I'm going to go back over, grab the Claude Code SDK, and so we're just going to install that. We're also going to install Commander, that CLI tool. And now if we jump over to Cursor, we can see our project's initialized. We've already got some of our packages here. So you can see there's Commander and Anthropic, and we've got README as well. And ultimately, everything's going to be driven through this index file. So before we dive into the coding part of this demo, we need to set up a personal access token in GitHub so that our agent can actually run locally. So what we need to do is click up on our icon here on the GitHub website. We'll go down to Settings. We'll scroll all the way down to Developer Settings, open up Personal Access Tokens and Fine-Grained Tokens. I've already set up one of these, but essentially you only need a couple of permissions. So I've already given this full access on my First Loop HQ organization since I know we're going to run this agent in all of our repositories. However, we need a couple of additional permissions down here, specifically contents set to read and write and pull requests set to read and write. We'll get into the exact reason why we need these in a little bit. But all right, so we're ready to jump into the code. So as I mentioned before, we are going to be running this tool as a command line tool using the Commander library. So we're just going to go ahead and start with a program. So it's as simple as something like this, where we're just initializing that program. And what we want to do is just give this a name, something descriptive like Claude Code changelog agent. We can go ahead and give this a description as well. Version doesn't really matter too much. And we're going to need a couple of options here. So the first required option we want is the repository. And so essentially this just tells Claude which repo are we working in. This is important in the case of, if we've given Claude access to potentially multiple repositories, this just makes it very clear which one we are interested in. The second is the path to the changelog file. By default, we'll just write to changelog.md, but if we need to, we can specify a different path here. So that's all we really need to get started. I'm going to clean this up a little bit just to make it a bit cleaner. I actually want a concrete interface that we can use for the CLI options. And we can do that just by specifying an interface with repo and file, and using this generic on the ops function, we can specify that accordingly. So at this point, we've essentially got our inputs. There is one caveat here. So we're going to need that specific hat that you installed or that you created earlier in the GitHub website. So we're going to expose that as GitHub pat. In terms of actually exposing this to our program, what you'll want to do is say export GitHub pat equals, paste your personal access token there, hit enter, and that will be available in the environment where we're going to run this agent locally during our testing. So at this point, we more or less got everything ready, and we're ready to call our agent and start building that. So I'm going to actually do that all in a different file here just to keep things a bit more tidy. So we've got our agent.ts file. And since we're using the Claude Code SDK, we're going to go ahead and import query here. And I'm just going to auto-complete there. We'll clean up some of these for the time being since we don't need them. And essentially what we've got is this run agent function, which is going to call the query method from the Claude Code SDK with a custom prompt. That's going to stream out messages as it moves along. And we just fed in this basic prompt to start, which is process recent commits in we actually want to specify the repo name there in the options.repo repository and update the README file with the changes. So at this point, we've kind of got the basics. However, you might start wondering, well, how does this actually interact with any of the GitHub APIs, especially if we want this to, for example, create a branch with the changes and open a pull request so that we can review the changelog updates before they get merged in. So that's where the MCP server comes in, that GitHub MCP server. So we can actually expose this out of the gate here. I'm just going to actually copy and paste in this setting that I've got saved from a previous run through. So again, this came from the public GitHub MCP documentation here. So we've got our URL, and we're using this authorization header with that GitHub pat, which we already confirmed that it's available in the environment. You set this up locally, so this MCP server will be able to perform specific actions based on that credential. So at this point, we've set up the MCP, which has a whole bunch of actions. Again, go look at the docs to see the full list. However, we haven't actually allowed any of those actions. So we actually only need a very specific subset of tools from that. And we can pre-authorize those using this allowed tools array. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste the full list here. Essentially, this list will give Claude the ability to inspect branches in the repo. It will be able to look at all the commits on those specific branches, specifically the default branch of the repo. It can get the details for each of those individual commits. It can get file contents so that it can get the current changelog and process that for updates. And then it's got all the permissions it needs to create, update that file, create a branch, and create a pull request so that we can merge all those changes in an organized manner. And that's really all we need for this demo. However, if we were to just run this right now, what you'd find is that that Claude is going to kind of take a lot of guesses along the way, specifically in terms of which commits it should be including in the changelog, how it should be formatting the changelog, and all of that. So we can actually provide some more prescriptive advice through a custom system prompt. So again, I'm going to go ahead and create this in its own dedicated file just to keep things tidy. And I'm going to copy and paste that in. So we've got the system prompt that basically just says you're a helpful assistant that updates change logs with changes from the past 24 hours. We give it the current time, and we say only use the tools that you've already been given access to. For Git-related tools, use the MCP_Git_star tools. And so this is just the naming convention that is followed by MCP servers. Since we did name our MCP server Git, all of the tools will follow this format. We include some rules for discovering changes. We get pretty specific here that you should only look on the default branch and at commits in the last 24 hours. Don't look at anything local. Don't look at stash changes. Don't look at anything on other branches. We only care about changes on the main branch. We also specify rules for filtering changes. So in this case, we're building a changelog for our users and consumers. So only changes that are relevant to them. We don't care about any internal docs updates, build script updates, dev dependency updates, any of that. It's just those bug fixes and features. Then we include very specific formatting details about what we want this to look like. Right now, we don't really have strict versioning in a lot of our repos, so we're just delivering this based on the date of introduction. And we got some other details here. We want a short description. We want the commit SHA in parentheses so that we can actually track the changes that it notes to specific commits. And yeah, anything that isn't a bug fix or feature we don't want. And then finally, we've got instructions for updating the changelog. So if there's no user-facing changes, we don't want any updates at all. If there are, you need to use this specific process for creating that. And so we want to create a branch. We want to create or update that changelog file on that branch. And we want to create a pull request from that branch into our default branch. And that's really all we need to do there. So now we can jump back over to our agent file. We can go ahead, import that, and then jump back out to our index file. And we just call await, run agent, and pass in those options. And there you have it. We're pretty much good to go. One thing I am going to change here is just rename this index file to program.ts to reflect that this is indeed a CLI tool. So at this point, we're pretty much ready to run our agent locally and give it a try. So I'm going to jump over to our terminal here. And to actually run this, we can just call bun run program.ts and then specify the specific repo we're working in. Go ahead and run that. So the very first message we see is all of the tools and things that Claude Code can see. And this is why we really provided a strict list of tools that it's allowed to use, because there are a ton of things here from that Git MCP we added, as well as just MCP servers that I have installed globally on my computer. So we don't want to use any of that. That's why we were very specific in our system prompts. That won't be as important when this is running in a GitHub action, because none of those MCP servers will be available or installed. So at this point, it's just going to kind of run through the whole process we outlined. It's going to discover all of the Git history. It's going to look at specific changes in those files. It's going to look at the existing changelog. In this case, it doesn't exist yet. And it looks like it tried to create a branch that already exists, which is fine. Hopefully it should recover from that. Otherwise, we just need to tune the system prompts a little bit. And looks like it's still going, so we'll just let this run. Okay, looks like that wrapped up. So now if we jump over to our repository here, we can actually see there's an open pull request. We can go ahead and give that a preview. So we can see it's creating this new changelog file. And I actually already committed a version of the CLI tool to main, so it correctly captured that change because that is obviously important for users. That's the only way they can use this tool. So essentially what I do now is go ahead and review the PR, merge it in, and we now have a changelog. So next we're going to talk about how we actually configure this to run in the background on a schedule as an ambient agent in the cloud so that we're getting these updates continuously. All right, we're going to go ahead and set this program up to run in a GitHub action. So this is relatively straightforward. We just need to write up some YAML and then add a new secret containing our path to the repository. I've already written up the YAML here. As you can see up above, I've just defined a handful of triggers. So we essentially have two. The first is just a cron trigger that runs every night at midnight. So this will just automatically run and pick up any changes to the repository and open a pull request for you to review in the morning, assuming there are any user-facing changes. The second is just workflow dispatch trigger that lets us run this manually to try it out so we don't have to wait until midnight to test it. So we've got just a single job here running on an ordinary Ubuntu agent, pretty straightforward. We're checking out the repository so we can actually get the source code. We're setting up bun. This is just a standard task that we can extend off of, and we're just using the latest bun version. We should probably confine this to a specific version, but this is a simple enough project that the likelihood of any breaks happening is low. Then we install those dependencies. So this brings down Claude Code, Commander, all that stuff we need. And then finally, we've got the task which runs the program we just wrote. So in this case, we've got our GitHub pat. Unfortunately, we do have to use a pat for this. There are secrets that are built into GitHub Actions, but those are considered application or installation token auth. So that is not currently supported by the MCP server yet, although there is an open issue on their GitHub tracking this. So ideally, at a certain point, we can just basically add the permissions to read and write content and read and write pull requests to this job. And then we can use that built-in secret that's just automatically exposed to the job. But for now, we just have to live with pats. So keep that in mind if you have an organization that limits that or requires you to rotate them every 30 or 90 days. Then we've got this Claude Code OAuth token, which this is the special setup that you perform through the Claude Code CLI. So I'm just going to run over to my terminal here and walk you through what that looks like. First of all, you're going to need the GitHub CLI tool, and you just need to run GitHub auth login to actually authenticate with your account. I'm going to skip that since I've already set it up for this repository. And then to actually install that Claude Code OAuth token, you use the Claude Code CLI and then install GitHub app. And you can go ahead, go through all these instructions. I've already done that for this repo, so I'm going to skip it here. It's all very straightforward. You can also, at this time, set up both the actual Claude Code agent, which you can assign issues to, and you can set up the Claude Code pull request reviewer agent if you would like. But in any case, that will create a secret in your repository, this Claude Code OAuth token, which is good for 1 year. And also keep that in mind as you need to rotate it. And this is actually the OAuth token linked to your personal account. So make sure you set up the OAuth token if you don't want to use an API key, because if you've got a max plan, you should have plenty of extra credits and just usage where running this nightly isn't going to put any restrictions on your account. And then finally, we're just running that program using bun. And we're pointing at the current repo. This is just a built-in reference. And really, that's all we have to do. So I've already been testing this out a little bit. And if we go over to, once you commit this to your main branch, you should, under actions, see this Claude Code changelog action. And so you can see I've run it a couple times. So I'll just click into one of these to see. And we see that generate changelog job. And so all of the steps succeeded. We can open this run Claude Code changelog task. And this is the same output that we saw in our previous, video. So there you go. Looks like it's successfully executed. And if we scroll back up to our pull requests, once again, we've got this changelog here. Open up file is changed. And this is very much just similar to the one that we had before. And there you go. This will now run every night in this repo. And eventually, you could set up additional workflows that run against other repositories if that hat is open enough. Otherwise, you could also bundle this into a Docker container and publish it and pull that down into any repository you'd like if you'd like the workflows to run there. But for now, we're going to leave that to another video. But let me know if you're interested. I'd love to walk through it. But there you go. You've got your ambient changelog generating Claude Code agent that uses the GitHub MCP. Thanks for watching.